Okay, so if we get going now, guys. So what we're going to try and do today is slightly different than normal. So the session isn't going to be an hour today. The session will try and fit that around 40 to 45 minutes if we can. The same sort of format. So we're going to talk about the questions that we've all had in this week. But we're going to start just with a bit of a broad introduction in case you hadn't already been to an Entrepreneurs Club, and a bit more specifically about what's gone on today with Rishi Sunak and the updates that we've had from there, which John and I'll handle. So just in case you haven't been along to one of our sessions before, usually we hold them in the Old Hall in the Cotton Exchange. And the Entrepreneur Club we've set that up specifically to create a safe space for business owners to attend. Usually we run them once a quarter, but when COVID-19 hit, we started to run them a bit more frequently. So every 2 to 3 weeks we've been running these sessions. And really what it is it's designed to be not a sales pitch to you from business owner to business owner, but really just John, Daniel and I have expertise in sort of helping businesses maximize something that they're doing, obviously, and we try and bring that to the fore each session to try and bring a bit of knowledge and normally a bit of networking as well. So hopefully it'd be nice if we can get back to that at some point where we can go back to the Old Hall and, you know, you can eat our sandwiches or whatever it is you want to do. But for now, if we crack on with the rest of the session, if you have got any questions, just in case you haven't used Zoom, I find it hard to believe no one's used Zoom yet, but if you haven't, there's a couple of buttons either along the bottom or the top, depending on what device you're using. So the major one that we'll focus on, so the chat button is just if you want to talk to each other, just general stuff, and the questions and answers. So if you have got specific questions that you'd like to ask the panel, you can even ask them anonymously, so there's a button to do that. Just click Q&A, field your questions in there, and we'll try and field them as part of this. So what I'll do is I'll just sort of briefly summarise what I've been reading today with Rishi Sunak's updates, and I'll pass over to John for a couple of his expert areas to look at. So obviously it's been a couple of hours now since the announcement. It was quite clear that it is not a budget, it is a summer statement, it is you know, quite different from that. But if we have a look at it, there's actually a couple of points in there. So there's a new Kickstart scheme which is coming in to help the younger generation, 21 to 25-year-olds. Apparently that is a £2 billion fund, which is designed to fund hundreds of thousands of jobs, apparently. And there is no cap on the number of places available. So how that will play out in the long term, well, the long term will tell. Training and jobs, there is some more money going towards apprenticeships, so they're going to be supported by bonuses for companies. So firms will get a payment of £2,000 for each apprentice they take on, and companies taking on apprentices over 25 will be given £1,500, but it seems that is a limited time offer, as that is a bonus scheme for employers who apply between August 2020 and January 2021. There's been some green investment announcements, which is really good. So a lot to do with decarbonising housing and public stock, and putting green recovery at the heart of concern. Stamp duty, a big one. So I think that it's been talked about for quite a while now, and whether that was going to be brought in immediately or whether that was going to be brought in at stages. Well, it seems that actually that's just going to be put into place, and stamp duty now is basically been increased the threshold has been increased from 125,000 to 500,000, and that's going to be running from to the 31st of March 2021, and that takes effect immediately. So I think the thinking behind that is now there are a number of people that want to move, and that should drive a real force behind the housing market. I know that Persimmon and a couple of other house builders shares increased quite significantly today. They had quite a nice bounce from that. And then the big famous one, the one that everyone's been talking about. If you do like to have your meals on a Monday to Wednesday and you do like to take the family out, you're now going to be government supported to do that, which is great. So the government is going to be paying for your kids' starters Mondays to Wednesdays in August. It'll be 50% off, up to a maximum discount of £10 per head for everyone, including children. But apparently businesses, if you are one of the businesses that wants to qualify for that, you have to register through a website launching on Monday, and then firms can claim back the money to have money in their bank account within 5 days. So that's the majority of updates from me. John, if I pass over to you for your specialist couple of areas, you want to tell the folks a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I suppose, well, from a business side, I guess you alluded to the Kickstart scheme, but the other ones, I guess, would be the furlough, where there'll now be a job retention bonus. So if you're furloughed any member of staff over the whole period of the furlough period between March and the end in October, if you bring them back and they're still working for you on the 31st of January 2021, you'll get a £1,000 payments from the government for every employee who kind of ticks those criteria. It is quite clear that it has to be back in kind of a proper capacity. They have to have an average salary of at least £520 between November and January to stop anyone trying to cheat here. But the idea of that is actually to reward employers who do bring people back and to genuinely retain the job, rather than, as has been perhaps seen by the government in some cases, just a way of delaying redundancy really while the government will pay the wages. So that's good. I think obviously some businesses will be doing sums over the cost it will take to keep staff until then, and £1,000 and kind of weighing that up. But I think it can only be a good thing. The other one would be, you mentioned the eating out scheme, which would be kind of really good for the hospitality businesses, hopefully, in terms of encouraging people to go out and eat, particularly Monday to Wednesday, which are usually the quieter days. I think the government, or perhaps everyone, were disappointed in some ways over actually the numbers at the weekends were not as much as they expected, because as much as we are allowed out now, a lot of people are still unsure about eating out. So it's a way of perhaps enticing people to go out if they can eat for half price. But also then the other one on an accounting perspective is the VAT, where, as you mentioned, the VAT rate for hospitality and accommodation businesses will be cut from 20% to 5% through to the end of January, and that will cover basically accommodation towards attractions and food, and non-alcoholic drinks. But the idea of that is that it would effectively, to us, the consumer going in, it will mean the cost of a meal and the cost of going to a tourist attraction will be cheaper. And therefore, hopefully, it could stimulate people to go out and spend money in those businesses, keep them going, stimulate employment and what have you, kind of work all of its way through. So again, that can only be a good thing. Back in 10 years ago, VAT was reduced for a little while, but only got as low as 15% then across the board, in a similar idea to try and get people spending. So those are the two main ones from an accountancy perspective.
Great, thank you very much. So if we kick off straight into a couple of the questions that, just in case you weren't familiar, anybody that's attending, this session gets pre-advertised beforehand on social media and so on and so forth. And we collect in essentially a big net of questions that we find we've not heard before or interesting or topical, and we try and answer those on this call. So first and foremost, if we can focus, John, on just a couple of tax and lending and schemes first, if that's all right. The first question that we've had in is, it's actually specifically to do with VAT. So the person here said, I cancelled my direct debit when coronavirus started, but have been still receiving some, well, they put threatening HMRC letters. I'm sure it's not threatening, but if it's bold and capitals and things like that, that's usually how letters come through from them. Is there anything I can do about this, or should I just ignore it? So what do you think?
I guess you shouldn't ignore it. The arrangement from the government on VAT was that any VAT payments due between the 1st of April and the 30th of June did not have to be paid and could be deferred until the 31st of March next year. So effectively you had a 3-month payment holiday, and let's say you will have to pay in the future, but it won't be till the 31st of March next year. If, therefore, you are being chased for a bill that was due between those dates, it is a mistake. I would just check what bill they're chasing, because if it predates the 1st of April, it is still payable. So it wasn't a case it was holiday for anything at all you owe. It was anything just payable between those specific dates. either way, you should speak to HMRC. I say ignoring it is the wrong thing to do, because you'll keep getting threatening letters, and the threatening letters do become potentially, court summons or debt collectors. If you don't owe it, hope your phone call can just fix that, of actually making it very clear that this is a mistake. And to be fair to HMRC, periodically they do make mistakes, and if you speak to them and it is a genuine mistake, they'll rectify it, and then that will stop that process. But please don't ignore it, because you don't want that to escalate for a mistake and end up with, as it has generally happened, sending debt collectors around. So please do speak to them.
Okay, and just following on from that slightly, that sort of theme, somebody else here has asked, so they're worried now that their business could go under, sadly, and I think they think that it's down to how slow their CBILS application has been, or how slow that their bank has been with their application. Is there anyone that they can go to and complain to about that, or should they just first instance go to the bank and have a discussion with them about what can be done? I know that's quite hard sometimes. What's our thoughts on that?
Some of the CBILS loans have been quite slow, and I think that's partly due to, a few things. If you step back from it, is the CBILS loans were kind of dropped on the banks at short notice, and then not long after, the bounce back loans were dropped on the banks at short notice. So in terms of just servicing all of these has been a resource issue for the banks. Bounce back loans were easier because it was a simpler process and for smaller amounts of money, so to the extent that most of those could just be done online with a kind of a yes or no. However, if the process has gone on for weeks and weeks and weeks, or even a couple of months, that is too long. At the very least, the bank should be speaking to you about the progress of it. So step one would be to speak to your contacts at the bank. Behind the banks, all of these loans have been administered by the British Business Bank. So I'd have a look on their websites. That's the central agency that's doing it for the government. They are then approving individual banks and lenders to be allowed to do CBILS loans or bounce back loans. So if you go to the British Business Bank website, it shows who you can go to get one. But without knowing definitively, it would make sense, because they're the administrator of the whole thing, that if there's a genuine issue, they would be who you'd go to.
Okay, and I've just put for anybody that's on now, I've just put the link to that in the chat bar as well, and anybody that's listening to this after, I'll send it out in the email format to you. So if we can change lanes slightly. So we've had a couple, and I've got to say a couple of furlough questions this week. Not the 25, 30 that we usually get, which is good. So if we start with the first one. So the first one, dead simple. So Daniel, how do I calculate the furlough grant for someone who is furloughed part-time? You're on mute.
Sorry, I always forget to do that. So essentially, it's quite a straightforward calculation. So for example, if your normal staff member works 40 hours a week and you're bringing them back 20 hours a week, you calculate it on the basis of that. So those 20 hours would form 50%. So 50% of their salary would be paid at the normal full rate that they would be on. The other 50% is calculated based on your furlough rate. Most of that is done at 80%. A lot of businesses are no longer topping up, for example. So in that instance, it's very straightforward that the 50% is calculated on a 100% basis. The other 50% is calculated on the 80% furlough rate. And you should be knowing what the furlough rate is. If you've been furloughing your staff since sort of March or April in any event, it should be fairly straightforward to calculate that. A lot of accountants, payroll providers are very used to doing this in any event. So all you really need to do is notify your accountant or your payroll provider. For example, Alex has done 20 hours this week. He's been furloughed for the other 20 hours, and they effectively do the calculation for you. But if you're doing it yourself, like I say, it's fairly straightforward. You just calculate whatever the hours that they've done. They've actually worked at 100%, the other at 80.
Great. Just to be clear, I've definitely done more than 20 hours this week. Just in case any clients are listening. Another question here, again to do with furlough. So I'm just trying to read this. It says, if I part furlough a staff member and they have holidays a few weeks after, can I fully furlough them there at that point?
Yeah, that was a question that was raised earlier this week, which kind of threw a bit of a curveball at me, which obviously made me have to look into things. So the quick answer is no, you can't, because if you've got a position where you're bringing staff back because there is some work to be done, whether it's a build-up process or whatever it may be, then clearly there's enough work for them to do for you to bring them back 2 days a week, 5 days a week, 3 days, whatever it may be. So if they've got holidays booked, then those holidays are holidays as they would normally. You couldn't furlough that person again just because they're taking holidays, unless it's a situation whereby you've had them in for a couple of weeks, they've done a particular project, they are going on holiday. So you could then furlough them for that period because, again, there's no work to be done, but they've already got pre-booked holidays. But if you're bringing them back part-time furlough, and that's continuing and looks like it's going to continue, you can't then just put them on full-time furlough for the period of their holiday. So the safest way we would say is in that situation that you would pay their holidays for the part that they've been furloughed and pay the holidays at full rate for the part that they would have done work. So holidays have to be paid at 100% in any event. So they would effectively be paid their full rate, but you could claim the part of the furlough if you are able to. But the point is, if you're bringing people back, the chances are there's work to be done, so you couldn't then re-furlough them fully for that period.
Thank you. We've also had a live question here as well, so I will throw this out to both of you. So Andy's just asked, as someone who's looking to take on their first member of staff, what do the new announcements from Rishi today mean for me? So what's your thoughts, Jon and Daniel, on that?
Should I start? I guess in terms of new member of staff, I mean, well, the first one is that the furlough is irrelevant to a new member of staff at all, as in that has passed, and therefore some of the bonus therefore will be gone. But in terms of the kickstart and the other stuff, there would be, if you took on an apprentice, there is essentially a £2,000 grant or payment for that. For that person, so it might be therefore worth thinking of an apprentice. To get the £2,000, they have to be 24 under. It drops to 1,000 or 1,500. Sorry, keep up with myself. It drops if they're over 25, but there's still amount there. So that could be well worth looking at whether an apprenticeship route would be good. There is other funding for apprentices as well inside, and this is a new one. So I think that would be, in terms of a new person, that would be the main thing out of today that could actually help a business owner take on a new staff member. They're talking about other traineeships and what have you, where potentially it'd be £1,000 if you give someone the work experience and length of time, but just wait to see some detail on that as well. But genuine employee, I think, would be where there is funding available.
Anything to add from you there, Daniel? The same for you?
Yeah, I think mainly for me, from an employment law perspective and obviously an HR perspective, particularly because certainly the grant that would affect 21 to 25-year-olds, what you would need to do is make sure that if you are hiring people, that you're not discriminating. So, for example, if you've got you've got two potential candidates for a role, you've got one who's between 21 and 25 and one who's maybe 40, there could be a potential that if you say, well, actually, I'm going to take on the 24-year-old because I could get the grant to support that, but you turn down the 40-year-old because effectively they're over that age limit, there could be a potential for age discrimination claims there. So that would be something that I'd be mindful of, is to make sure that you're not going against one of the protected characteristics, one of which that jumps out is age. The other thing that you may want to consider going forward is, because we're still in a period of volatility, is when you obviously have your contract of employment, you may want to make sure that there's a layoff clause within it. So if we go into another phase or another spike, or if it keeps continuing, then at least that would then allow you to lay people off in the future, sort of shorter term, or have them on some sort of reduced working. Because if you've got that kind of contract clause within it, then at least it gives you that flexibility going forward. Whereas I know one of the issues that we had with some of our clients is they didn't have that within them, so therefore there was no automatic right to furlough, so they had to get agreements from employees to do that. So they're just a couple of things that I would certainly consider.
Great. Okay. I'll field a couple of questions that seem to fall into my remit now. So two of them bridge together, so I'll try and combine them, condense the session. So first off, somebody's asked, should they be invested in tech stocks at the moment? And the second one is, what are our thoughts on the Trump-Biden election prospects, the potential impacts on the market? What impact would it have, good or bad, for Donald Trump to not be in the White House beyond the 3rd of November? I think the person's given away that they want Donald Trump in the White House beyond the 3rd of November just by the fact that they've referenced that at the end. The reason I probably draw them together, so look, there is a long time to go before the 3rd of November, particularly in US politics. Now, if you look at the polls at the moment, then Biden is clearly ahead, and actually in some of the key swing states he seems to be ahead as well. But as we know from our own system and from past US elections, you shouldn't really necessarily take too much notice of the polls. A lot can happen, like I say, between now and then. The reason I draw the two questions together is actually, if we were to look at the US stock market and perhaps what's been going on there this year, actually, I think that the NASDAQ, so the tech-heavy portion, it's a composite index over in the US, that's actually hit, I believe, 27 brand new highs, and that's not just highs this year, they're all-time highs over the past couple of months. So it just shows you actually that as the world has been turning more to tech services, things like Zoom, things like streaming services, cloud-based activity, that type of thing, the so-called FANG stocks, so Facebook, Apple, Netflix, Google, and Amazon. Amazon is argued to be a retailer, but really it's a tech company. They've done really well out of that. Now, I think that there's one of the big things which has come out of conversations that I've been having over the past few weeks is just how defensive Donald Trump has been around the digital tax, which has been sort of pushed or trumpeted from around the world. So the EU are really keen on that. The UK, I believe, are also keen, but in the US, they've been a little bit more dovish on that sentiment. And understandably, because really over this year, I think it's shown how reliant their markets are based on tech stocks. Now, Biden, I think the prospect of him coming in, I think he's quite more considerably hawkish on that. And I think that he probably would go for some kind of digital tax on those companies. I think that the monopoly size of the companies would also be called into question perhaps a little bit sooner. So there'd be some quite serious ramifications there. But ultimately, it's a very difficult question to answer. There are positives and negatives of both. I think that how infections rate goes over the next few months over in the US, because they're not going through the same experience as we are in Europe. I think if anybody's tuned into some news, they will have seen that recently. And it is, like I say, a very long time to November. So we will see what happens in terms of policy development and what happens in terms of the stances that are taken on things getting closer to the election. Hope that sort of partially answers that question. If I move on to some questions about return to work. So it's always nice, I think, to talk about return to work because it maybe signals a bit more of a return to normality. And we've been asked actually quite a few questions on that. So question for Jon in this area, specifically question for Jon. It says here, so if staff work from home more, are there any tax advantages for them or for me? Should this staff be claiming anything on their tax return?
Well, funny, in terms of working from home during coronavirus, there are a few things that work from home and the tax impacts, and traditionally it's different over whether you have to work from home or whether you choose to work from home. So during coronavirus, it would be deemed as you had to work from home, and what that means is that yes, there is tax relief for some costs that might be incurred. As with all tax reliefs, they should be wholly and exclusively for the purpose of the business. But what it actually means really is that, as an example, if you, as an employer, if you decide to buy some kits for your staff to work from home, whether that's a chair, a printer, or what have you, in normal times, that's actually a taxable benefit. At the moment and through to March next year, it's not. because there's a recognition these are not normal times and people having to work from home and might not need to before. So if you buy, like say, whether you like a printer, a chair, a desk or something, you now get kind of tax relief on that. There's no benefit on the employee. In terms of kind of the other costs and where there might be kind of tax relief are that if an employee has to basically do something, for example, if they don't have broadband at home and they need it now, there would be tax relief on getting broadband in. If they already have broadband, there can't be tax relief on any of that broadband. So if they don't have it, but you have to put it in for work purposes, there's tax relief. If they already have it, but just the usage goes up, and I know practically everyone's on an all-you-can-eat package of some sort, but if you were, you can't claim any of it. What you can claim if you're working from home, and whether your employer pays it to you or you as an individual claim, is that there's actually kind of an all-in allowance to cover effectively the kind of the light, heat, and other costs, including broadband, and that's £6 per week. So that can be claimed one of two ways. The employer can pay the employee £6. The employer claims tax relief. The employee just has the £6. Thank you very much, no tax to pay. If your employer doesn't pay you anything, and you're an employee, you can claim tax relief on the £6 in either your tax return, or you can fill in a form called a P87, which is used to claim tax relief on expenses. Now, you're not going to get rich on that because the tax relief on £6, if you're 20% taxpayer, is £1.20 per week, but it's £1.20 more than you'd have got otherwise. And if you work at home all year, you know, that kind of adds up to 60 quid or what have you. So basically, there's a £6 a week allowance available to anyone to cover the sundry costs. You know, you've got the lights on more often, the heat on, the broadbands and what have you. If you're buying a specific bit of kit, let's say right now, yes, you can claim tax relief on that. And that is the same if ever your employer makes you work from home. It's your choice. There isn't actually tax relief on buying the kit. It was your choice.
Good. Very impressed that you remembered the P87 number as well. I'm always impressed when accountants can remember these forms.
I had a little moment there, and you know, you look it up in a minute and find I've got it wrong, Alex. So just move on quick.
Move on from that. Delete that. Okay. All right. So I can probably pose this to both of you. But for a start, Daniel, with you, and John, give me your thoughts as well. So somebody said here that it feels like my staff are all at different stages in terms of mindset on their confidence to return to work. So they'd be interested to hear how the panel are planning to manage this with their staff, and whether more flexible working, they think more flexible working would lead to a more or less efficient working environment and practice. So what's your thoughts on that, guys?
Yeah, so speaking from personal experience, I find that certainly we've started to go back to the office now only 2 days a week. So we're on a bit of a rota system whereby there's only 5 people maximum in the office at any one time. We're all making sure that the desks are 2 meters away. Things like there's only one person in the kitchen at any one time and those sorts of things. So I've personally found that I'm more productive. And that's not to say that I'm less productive at home, but particularly if you've got kids at home, which I have 2, 7 and 9, your day is more disjointed because your focus has to be taken away because they're fighting over the pencil sharpeners or whatever it may be. So my personal view is I think that I found I'm more productive at work in the office, but there is the counter argument to working from home. You've not got the commuting costs. You've not got all those things that I'll buy my lunch today instead. So there is a bit of a trade-off. So I think it's personally, and I think a lot of businesses have found that it's made people appreciate potentially their work-life balance, the lack of commuting, the fact that they're spending more time with their family and those sorts of things. So I personally think that going forward, there will be a lot more working from home because people have obviously been able to, even though they've been forced into this situation, businesses have been able to work from home. So it's just about, as a business, then monitoring whether that does lead to a downturn in productivity, because the nature of the digital age that we're in now is that most people's businesses can be monitored remotely. We can see what such and such is done on a daily basis and those sorts of things. So I think it's going to be very individual to business, because some businesses may easily adapt to working from home, whereas some may say, well, we still need people in the office 2 days a week to do various things. So it's going to be very case specific, I would imagine. But I think there's pros and cons to both sides of it, really.
And John, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, for us, I am in the office right now. We're looking to, from next Monday, it'll be optional for the team to come in. There are a few who really, really, really want to come in. There are some who are not ready to come back yet. So it's going to be optional for the next few months, or you can see how things pan out. I'm in today. We had a health safety person in the day, so we were doing all the risk assessments and what have you. One of the team is in here right now, who is my employee representative for all things COVID-19, who is just helping me get things ready in terms of stuff we need to do. And we don't, if we don't need to do anything physically, it's basically making sure that, you know, she's actually, I think she's right before I walked in here, she's printing off and putting everywhere lots of signs and stickers over, you know, wipe this down after you've used it, or, you know, we can't put the aircon on, so it'll stick on the aircon thing, so no, just by habit presses it. So it's lots of those kind of things for us. I think in terms of, yeah, the team, some are really keen to come back because they feel perhaps a little isolated working at home in terms of support and asking questions. It might be, you know, the home situation, as you said, if you've got young kids who makes it harder to work from home, so you kind of want to come in. Others, you know, a bit tentative about coming back, so that's okay. And some are probably would be quite happy to come back, but we all kind of get into the habit. And to me, coming in on Monday, I came in for the meeting kind of about this. Almost like I was a little nervous myself driving in. Not opposed to coming in. It just felt you've settled into such a routine of being at home. So, like I said, we're going to make it optional for the next few months. We're kind of going to revisit after the summer holidays, probably see how things are going to move on. I think on any given day, we probably won't have as many as half the staff in at any time, but we're quite lucky. We've got quite a lot of room, so we can actually we could actually have all the team in. And actually meet all the requirements, so it will be optional.
Yeah, that's good. I think I've been thinking about it this week, and the conversations that I've been having are very much around. I think this actually might be quite a big opportunity for our workplaces to really think about, you know, optimizing work and efficiency, but at the same point having a happier, healthier staff with us as well. I mean, there's definitely things like, for example, if I was working on a file and I could open the door and shout to Michelle and ask her a question and then shut the door and get on with it, or vice versa. I think there's that element of things which is a bit more difficult working at home, and then ultimately, you know, there's more distractions potentially at home. So if the sun starts shining, if there's just like something in my eye line that I'll just go and address and do, whatever that is. But as well, I think that people are feeling a little bit happier and healthier with this format. But I think it's that ability to gel the two now. I think there was very quick winners who managed to move into lockdown style, put it that way, very quickly. But now I think the winners in Q3, Q4, and move back into that sustainable business model will be the ones that try and adapt to that hybrid approach more quickly as well, and just think innovatively how they do it.
I think it's one good work from home, where I think everyone probably likes working from home,
yeah,
but not all the time. And we've always had some of the team who've worked from home for 1 day a week consistently. We just taken on a new team member in March who that was the plan. She'd work 1 day a week at home. Obviously, it quickly became every day. Because if you're working 1 day a week or 2 days a week at home, because you're planning and you know in advance, you can do all the stuff as you see, need to reach out and get a file off Michelle or collaborate with the team on those days, and then have a day at home of getting your head down and not being disturbed. I think but working from every day is quite tricky. And I think with our clients, as in historically, a lot of our clients who set up on their own and work from home at first actually do find it quite hard of just feeling a bit isolated and miss that kind of us of having people to bounce off. So a good mixture is kind of great, and so that's what we'll be looking for going forwards.
Just another thing to pick up on, Alex, as well, while we're on the subject, is when businesses are considering the return to work, obviously they should consider flexibility. So if people are saying, for example, could I start at 7 and finish at 3 instead, or could I potentially come in a bit later and leave later? In this sort of period of flux and uncertainty, I think it's a good idea to engage with your staff, because like we've all said, this hybrid model or some sort of system where, for example, people are saying, well, I'm not too keen on, for example, getting public transport, allowing people to come in earlier or later outside of rush hours, potentially making reduced lunch times. For example, if people want to say, well, I'll have half an hour lunch so I can leave at 4:30, particularly over the summer holidays when children are going to become an issue, particularly things like holiday clubs may not be the same as they were last year. So I think this sort of period, employees need to be really flexible. Obviously not too flexible that they can't get the job done, but they have to listen to their staff, because there are a lot of people, particularly if they haven't got the support that they would have had last summer, particularly things like holiday clubs is a prime example. So I think the flexible approach is needed as well from employers.
It's a good point. It's a good point. Okay, so I'm wary that try and get this done for sort of around 8:15, make it a little bit shorter. So I'll field one question and then I'll put another one out to the panel. So a couple of questions combined again. So somebody's asked, how does this year compare with previous recessions? And just looking at sort of different letters to describe the economic recovery, I think I understand what they're saying there. What things currently looking like and what do these mean? As a financial advisor, I do love a slide, so I'm going to share you a couple of slides. So this is one that I prepared specifically. So how does this downturn compare with previous ones? This just shows you the FTSE All Share Index. So I'm assuming this person's talking specifically around UK markets. It goes back to 1987. I think one thing that it does show is we're kind of tracking along the lines of sort of 1987 and that downturn and what happened there in terms of the UK. That isn't the picture globally, so it's not all the same. But just in case everybody's not aware, that there's certain letters that have been used and symbols actually, but just to confuse things over the past few months, is to describe the recovery. So you might have heard of a V-shaped recovery, you might have heard of a W, an L, a U, and a swoosh, just to really mix it up. They thought, well, we can't describe it with a letter, so it's like a swoosh. So essentially like the downturn versus the bounce on the other side. I think what's quite interesting over the past few weeks, initially it sounded almost impossible that we would go through a V-shaped recovery, and we were probably starting to look more along the lines of a U. The worst case scenario has been an L, so a massive fall and a bump on the bottom. But the Bank of England came out, Anthony Holiday in there came out last week and the week before, suggesting that the data that they're looking at is now suggesting something more along the lines of a V, if that is a lopsided V, so it is more of like that swoosh type shape. We had some PMI data out quite recently, so up to the end of June, which just shows sort of what's going on in UK services, what's going on in manufacturing. I'd stress the point that COVID-19 has really messed up some really nice looking graphs, because I had some really nice looking graphs which just kind of were all kind of the same. They had a nice little fluctuation in it. But I'm going to have to explain this for 20 or 30 years now, because people are going to look at my charts and go, oh, what happened there? And you go, yeah, do you remember COVID when we were all locked in our houses for a while? Well, that was that. So it does look like more akin to a sort of that V shape. However, what I would say is that we're looking at this still quite on the cautious side of things, not trying to catch a falling sword and sort of go, well, the good times are here, which I think that, you know, some people maybe are doing. And I think that ultimately we've still got a lot to come this year. We've still got rising infection rates in the US, for example, although there's discussions about sort of better treatments for this and perhaps a better management system and maybe lower ages and things like that. We've got an election happening over in the US. Don't forget as well, Brexit has not gone away. Brexit, everybody's forgotten about it, but it's still happening. There's still arguments that are affecting our currency specifically very, very largely at the moment. So I wouldn't be surprised personally, and I think, you know, I'm not a fund manager, speaking to some of our fund managers, they're saying, listen, we could be due some more volatility here. It wouldn't be out of the realms of possibility. I don't think they were quite out of the woods yet. So it's sort of keeping that. It's nice what's happened so far. It is good, don't get me wrong. I would rather have that than the L or the other alternatives. If you look at the volatility this year versus 2008, this is a shadow of so far. But it's just about remaining cautious and remaining sort of objective about decision making. So if I can just follow up just a couple of questions. So I'll ask a quick furlough question if I can just keep it to a couple of minutes, and then I'll ask one on grants and then we'll close. So the furlough question is, one of my staff is refusing to come back to work and says I have to keep them furloughed. What can I do? So what's your thoughts on that?
Okay, so in terms of that, it really depends on the reason that they're saying they can't return. So if it's, for example, they've got caring commitments, so children not gone back to school, or the school holidays are coming up, those sorts of things, then they can still be furloughed. However, it's not up to the employee to decide that. But if they say I've got caring commitments or I've got to look after an elderly relative, then they can still continue to be furloughed. But if the business has done its risk assessments and said, oh, here's the risk assessments, we've shared them with you, have you got any comments or queries? Then in reality, if that person is saying, well, point blank, I'm refusing to come to work, and there's no real reason why that should be, then potentially it could be a disciplinary issue, because it's a reasonable management request to say, well, everything's back to normal to some extent. People have been able to go out over the weekend. So to some extent, there's no reason why people shouldn't be returning to work. But you would have to look at the individual circumstances. So like I say, if it's the caring commitments that people may have, then yes, you would have to treat those as they should be still continue to be furloughed.
Great, thank you. And just in an Indiana Jones style of rolling under the door before it shuts, John, I'll fire you a question which I was asked last week. I've been told that I'm not eligible for the small business rate relief, and they have 3 premises across 3 different boroughs. Is there anything else that they can do in terms of grants that they might be potentially eligible for? How should they go about this?
I guess so. The small business grant was for people getting small business rates relief, which you don't generally get if you've got more than 1 premises. So that would probably kind of rule them out of that. In terms of other grants, unless they're in retail, hospitality and leisure, where there was a separate £25,000 grant, which I'm going to assume they're not, there have been discretionary grants available, although most of those have now been allocated, in that this was basically a top-up scheme from the government to reflect the fact that some people missed out on the original grants for a number of reasons. You had to be the registered rates payer, and some people actually pay it to the landlord, so the council didn't know that they're the people really paying it. Each council actually allocated it slightly differently because it was discretionary, and quite a number of our clients have got those. Some have got £10,000, which is the maximum. Others have got amounts, you know, from the smallest, about 3,300, because people looked at what they were spending on their premises. Liverpool actually did it on the number of employees you have, so it's very simple. You know, you had to have more than 10 employees, I think, to get £10,000. If it's 1 employee, it's £2,500 in stages. But I think a lot of those have been fully allocated now. But I would still have a look on your local council's website to see whether there's anything left. Because I think some different councils have moved at different speeds in terms of allocating that. It was aimed at basically people with premises who missed out on the other stuff. Specifically, you must have missed out on the previous grant to be eligible. The other one, actually, I think I mentioned the other week, actually, on here, was that Enterprise Nation have a grant, if you want to call that, a fund of money, which they are giving out to businesses who have missed out on all other grants. Again, it will be discretionary. It will be up to, I think, £5,000 per business. And I will, in a second, put it into the chat box, or perhaps we can send an email afterwards, the link, because that grant, it's been done regionally. For the north of England, the applications open at the end of this month. I can't remember the precise date, which is why I'll look at the link. It's like the 25th, 26th or 27th of July for people to apply from that. Basically, somebody's put It's a good a few million quid actually into a pot for this. So it's a really good kind of grant, but it's specifically for people who've missed out on everything else.
Great. Thank you very much. Okay, so I'll draw the meeting to a close there, just by sharing with you a couple of points. So what we will do after this is we've recorded the session. We will send that session out. We will send a follow-up email to everybody, just thanking you for your time, letting you know when the next session will be. I think the next session will probably be a little bit further away now, so probably sort of a month and a half away. We'll keep you updated. If you would like to join the Entrepreneurs Club, that gives you an opportunity to stay updated with updates and get sort of an SME report for a benchmark at your company versus other local companies against nationally. We've partnered with Dun & Bradstreet to do that. There is a very complicated link on there. I really need to sort out that and get that down to a nice little formatted link, but I will send that out in the email as well. And also, if you would like to follow us on LinkedIn, we have a specified LinkedIn group. You just need to search for the group, which is 8944110. Search that in the search bar. It will come to us. We will approve you. We will chat with you. It'll be all good. We'll have a great time. Thank you very much for everybody for attending. If there is anything else that we can do for you, please do let us know. We are here to support. Otherwise, I hope to see you all soon and stay safe. Thank you very much.